The new director didn't just fire me. He terminated me in front of my entire team like he was making an example out of a dog that needed to be trained. No private meeting. No warning. Just a cold announcement in a Monday morning huddle that left my coworkers frozen and my stomach hollow. Then he said something that made my skin burn. We're removing inefficiencies. Starting today. He thought humiliation would erase me. He didn't know one detail. Friday's client presentation, the one worth millions, was built on my system, my access, and my signature. Without it, they weren't just losing me. They were about to lose the client. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Thorn Calder, and I was the lead solutions architect at a mid-sized consulting firm called Stratwell Partners. I wasn't flashy. I didn't play politics. I did the hard work, translating chaos into plans clients could trust. For 4 years, I'd built a reputation as the person who could walk into a failing project and rescue it without drama. That reputation didn't matter to Dorian Klein, the new director flown in from corporate headquarters with a spotless resume and a hunger for control. On his first day, he smiled too much and asked too few questions. He toured the office, shook hands like a politician, and spoke in buzzwords: alignment, accountability, performance culture. Then Monday morning arrived, and he summoned our entire team into the glass conference room. I assumed he wanted introductions. Instead, he looked straight at me and said, "Thorn, today is your last day. We're going a different direction." I laughed once, thinking it had to be a mistake. It wasn't. The room went silent. My team, Leora Sen, Bramwell Bram Pike, Celine Armitage, and Knox Halder, stared at the table like eye contact would make them complicit. Dorian didn't flinch. He slid a folder toward me. Severance. Non-disclosure. No discussion. When I asked why, he said, "Your leadership style doesn't fit where we're going." That was a lie dressed as policy. The truth was simpler. I was associated with the previous director, and Dorian wanted to make a clean break. He wanted everyone to see that loyalty to the old guard had consequences. I stood up, collected the folder, and walked out with my face calm and my hands steady, even though my heart was hammering. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me crack. But as I stepped into the hallway, I remembered Friday. The client presentation. The one Dorian had been bragging about to executives all week without realizing what it actually required. And for the first time since the humiliation, I felt something close to control. I drove home in a fog, didn't just fire me, not because I didn't understand what happened, in front of my entire because team, I couldn't believe making an example out of a dog being fired that needed to be trained. Being fired in front of your team feels like your identity being just a cold announcement in a Monday morning. I sat at my kitchen table, my coworkers and stared at the severance papers until the letters blurred. Then he said something that made my phone buzzed with messages from coworkers, removing inefficiencies, all versions of the same sentence. Starting today. I'm so sorry. Humiliation would erase me. This is wrong. He didn't know one detail. Bram wrote, Friday's client presentation. Celine wrote, the one worth millions. Mistake. Was built on my system, my access. That was the point of how Dorian did it. Without it, public termination creates private fear. They were about to lose the client. It teaches people that resistance. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like. Friday's client presentation wasn't just a slideshow. My name is Thorn Calder. It was a live demo, and I was the integration solutions architect I designed at a mid-sized biggest prospect called Ravenport Medical Systems. I wasn't flashy. Multi-year contract. I didn't play politics. Millions in fees. I did the hard work. And that demo relied on a secure environment plans clients could trust. The credentials were issued under my name reputation as the person who could walk into a failing project, not because I wanted power, rescue it without drama, but because compliance. That reputation didn't matter to Dorian Klein. I'd warned the previous director about dependency corporate headquarters and had requested a resume and a hunger. It never happened. On his first day, had fired the only too much and asked to certify the environment was safe. He toured the office, shook hands like a politician, and spoke in buzzwords. It was the natural result of a company that ignored invisible work. Then Monday morning arrived. I called my attorney friend entire team into the glass to ask what I could and couldn't do. I assumed he wanted introductions. Then said, instead, he looked straight at me and said, "But you don't have to carry liability. Today is your last day. That terminated. We're going a different direction." That was the key. I laughed. I wasn't plotting, thinking it had to be a mistake. I was protecting myself. The room presented using my credentials after I was fired. Leora Sen, Bramwell Bram Pike, Celine Armitage, and Knox Halder. I logged into my laptop, at the table like I opened the compliance portal, and drafted Dorian a formal offboarding notice. He slid a folder. I was no longer affiliated with Stratwell. Non-disclosure. Any use of my access no discussion. Must cease immediately. When I asked why, transfer of ownership required. Your leadership style doesn't fit where we're going. I sent it to IT security. That was a lie dressed as policy. Then I sat back and waited. I was the moment Dorian's team tried to prepare for Friday, Dorian wanted to make they would run straight into a locked gate. He wanted everyone to see that loyalty to the old guard had consequences. I stood up, collected the folder, and walked out with my face calm and my hands steady, even though my heart was hammering. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me crack. But as I stepped into the hallway, I remembered Friday. The client presentation. The one Dorian had been bragging about to executives all week without realizing what it actually required. And for the first time since the humiliation, I felt something close to control. Tuesday morning, IT security called me. The analyst, Orson Vale, sounded uncomfortable. "Thorne, we received your offboarding notice," he said. "We didn't know you were terminated." I said calmly, "It happened yesterday." Orson swallowed. "About the Ravenport environment, leadership is asking for access." I replied, "Then leadership needs to assign a new accountable owner and complete the transfer process." Orson hesitated, then admitted the truth. The transfer wasn't simple. The environment was tied to encryption keys and audit trails requiring the current owner's attestation. Without it, their demo couldn't go live. "Who can approve it?" Orson asked. "I can," I said, "if it's done properly and I'm protected." Orson said he'd escalate. An hour later, I got an email from Dorian Klein himself. It wasn't an apology. It was an order disguised as politeness. "Thorne, we need you to cooperate to ensure business continuity. Please provide the necessary credentials by end of day." My jaw tightened. He wanted to treat me like a tool he could pick up after throwing it away. I forwarded the email to Yarrow, who replied with 2 sentences. "Do not respond emotionally. Respond legally." So I did. I wrote back, short and professional. "I am no longer employed by Stratwell. For compliance and liability reasons, access transfer requires formal documentation and indemnification. Please have counsel contact my attorney." That's when the pressure started. My phone rang with unknown numbers. HR left a voicemail offering a consulting arrangement. The tone was suddenly friendly, like the humiliation never happened. I didn't bite. I waited for the one call that mattered, the client. Ravenport's procurement director, Merrick Alden, called Stratwell asking to confirm the demo scope and technical owner. The company couldn't truthfully name anyone else. In a single afternoon, the lie Dorian built, inefficiency removal, collided with the truth. I wasn't inefficiency. I was infrastructure. Wednesday morning, Dorian finally called me directly. The analyst's voice was tight with controlled irritation. Sounded uncomfortable. "Thorne," he said, "we received your offboarding notice," he said. I almost laughed. "We didn't know you were terminated." Reasonable would have been a private meeting, I said calmly, an honest explanation, and a respectful transition. About the Ravenport environment, he'd chosen humiliation. Leadership is asking for access. Now he wanted cooperation. I kept my voice calm. "Then leadership have your needs counsel to contact my accountable owner and complete the transfer Dorian process." Exhaled sharply. Orson hesitated, holding the company then admitted the truth. I replied, "The transfer wasn't simple. I'm refusing to be liable. The environment was tied to encryption keys and audit trails requiring the current owner's attestation. That pause told me he didn't understand the difference between their demo couldn't go live. I wasn't demanding revenge. Orson asked. I was demanding protection, I said. Dorian tried a different angle. Done properly and I'm protected. He offered money. Orson said he'd pay for a few hours. An hour later, off the transfer. I got an email. I asked for the terms in writing. It wasn't an apology. Then he said, "An order disguised. You can't do a full contract for this. Thorne, we need you to cooperate to ensure business continuity. He wanted the benefit without accountability. Please provide the necessary credentials. Then the transfer doesn't happen." My jaw tightened. On Thursday, Stratwell's legal counsel me like a tool he could pick up after throwing it away. They proposed a formal, I forwarded the email to Yarrow, indemnification, consulting fee, and acknowledgement that the termination was executed improperly. So I did. Not an apology, I wrote back, short and professional. Yarrow reviewed it and said, "I am no longer employed by Stratwell. This is as close as you'll get to them admitting fault. For compliance and liability reasons, I signed, and I transferred ownership requires formal documentation and indemnification. But I didn't return as an counsel employee. Contact my attorney. I returned as a professional. That's when the pressure understood his worth. My phone rang Friday morning. Unknown numbers. Ravenport's team HR arrived. Left a voicemail. The demo ran smoothly because the system was strong. The tone was suddenly friendly. Like the Dorian stood at the front, happened, smiling. I didn't bite. I waited for the one call that mattered. The client, the engineers, the Ravenport's procurement director, the client's Merrick Alden knew what happened. Stratwell asking to Dorian knew the demo scope, and that was the real consequence. The company couldn't humiliation name anyone else. It exposed in a single afternoon. And once leadership realizes a director burns critical talent for ego, collided with the truth. Trust never. I wasn't inefficiency. The presentation arrived like a reckoning. And Dorian learned the lesson he should have learned before he tried to make an example out of me. You can fire a person in public, but you can't fire the truth out of a system that still bears their fingerprints. After the emergency consulting agreement was signed and the transfer completed, I expected the tension to ease. It didn't. It changed shape. I wasn't back inside Stratwell as an employee, but my absence was now louder than my presence had ever been. The team felt it immediately. Leora texted me late Friday night. They're scrambling. She didn't mean emotionally. She meant structurally. Dorian had assumed that once the demo was over, the danger had passed. What he didn't understand was that the presentation was only the opening move. Ravenport didn't sign contracts based on charm. They signed based on continuity. And continuity required a plan Dorian didn't have. Over the weekend, I received 3 separate emails from Stratwell, operations, security, and legal, each asking versions of the same question. Who now owned what I used to manage? The answer was uncomfortable. Ownership had been informal for years because I was reliable. When reliability disappears, informality turns into risk. I replied once, concisely, pointing them back to the transfer documents and the limits of my involvement. I wasn't being difficult. I was being precise. Precision is what companies forget they need until they're audited. After the emergency consulting agreement was signed and the transfer completed, technical lead requested a follow-up session. Without executives present, it changed shape to review the architecture. I wasn't back inside Stratwell as Dorian volunteered to lead but my absence was now louder than my presence halfway through the session. The team felt it immediately. About failover responsibility. Leora texted me late Friday night. Paths. They're scrambling. Dorian stumbled. She didn't mean emotionally. She referenced teams that didn't exist anymore and processes. Dorian had assumed that once the demo was over. When Ravenport asked who authored the design, what he didn't understand was that the presentation was only before someone said my name. Ravenport didn't sign contracts based after the call. Stratwell's CEO asked to speak with Dorian privately. And continuity required I didn't hear what was said, but I saw the change over the weekend. I received Dorian 3 separate emails from Stratwell. He started asking operations, security, and legal. The authority he tried to manufacture on day one was eroding now owned what I used to manage. People weren't rebelling. The answer was uncomfortable. They were recalibrating. Ownership had been informal for years. They realized he didn't understand I was reliable. He was driving. When reliability disappears, informality turns into risk. I replied once, concisely, pointing them back to the transfer documents and the limits of my involvement. I wasn't being difficult. I was being precise. Precision is what companies forget they need until they're audited. That week, HR reached out again. This time not with offers, but with surveys and process reviews. Damage control. They wanted to know why knowledge hadn't been documented, why dependencies weren't mapped. I answered honestly, because documentation takes time, and time had always been spent delivering instead of protecting. It was the same answer I'd given for years, now finally being heard because the cost of ignoring it was visible. Yarrow warned me not to get pulled back into internal fixes. They'll try to turn your insight into free labor, he said. He was right. When Dorian asked if I'd sit in on a few planning sessions, I declined. I wasn't bitter. I was finished. The line between professional help and unpaid rescue is thin, and I wasn't crossing it again. That Thursday, HR reached out again, had caught up to the truth. Time not with offers, not gossip, surveys, pattern and process reviews. People saw how fast Dorian fired me. They wanted to know why knowledge hadn't been documented, and how quietly leadership started questioning his judgment. I answered honestly. That's the thing about documentation takes time. They teach and time fear, had always been spent delivering instead of protecting. When Friday rolled around again, same answer Ravenport sent a list of conditions now finally being heard because the continuity clauses was named responsible owners. Yarrow warned me not to get pulled back into internal fixes. Stratwell agreed to try to turn your insight. Dorian had no choice, he said. The company survived, was right, but the story changed. Dorian asked if I'd sit in on a few planning wanted to make an example had become an example himself. I wasn't bitter. Of what happens when you mistake dominance. The line between professional help and unpaid rescue for the first time since Monday's and I wasn't crossing it again. Felt something settle. Not victory. Alignment. The system was correcting itself, and I no longer had to be inside it for that to happen. The following week exposed what panic looks like when it's wearing a suit. Dorian didn't lash out. He overcorrected. Meetings multiplied. Committees formed. Slides replaced conversations. The company tried to paper over a knowledge gap with process, and it showed. People who used to come to me with problems now hesitated, unsure who was allowed to decide. That uncertainty spread like humidity, slow, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. I watched from the outside, not with satisfaction but with a strange sense of inevitability. Systems don't collapse because one person leaves. They collapse because no one knows who's accountable next. Ravenport sent additional questions, deeper this time, about incident response drills, audit cadence, and escalation authority. Stratwell answered, but the answers lacked a single owner. That absence mattered more than any typo. Inside the firm, confidence drained quietly. Leora told me teams were documenting everything now, not to improve, but to protect themselves. Fear had replaced trust. Dorian noticed the shift and tried to regain momentum with urgency, deadlines, mandates, a new org chart that changed titles without changing understanding. It looked decisive. It wasn't. The following week, Stratwell's board requested a briefing on delivery risk. Dorian didn't lash out himself. He overcorrected. He shouldn't have. Meetings multiplied. The board doesn't want committees formed. It wants clarity. Slides replace conversations. When asked who carried final responsibility, the company tried to paper over a knowledge technical process, and it Dorian referenced the new structure. People who used to come to me with board member now hesitated, unsure who signed off on the original architecture. That uncertainty spread like humidity. Hung in the room longer than it should impossible to ignore. Boards noticed silence. I watched from the outside. After that meeting, not with satisfaction, Dorian stopped sending strange sense of inevitability. Started scheduling one-on-ones. Systems don't collapse. The tone changed from command to inquiry. They collapse because no one knows who's accountable. Authority, once cracked, Ravenport sent additional questions. The board didn't call this time. They didn't incident response drills, the record already audit spoke. Cadence, and escalation. I felt a flicker of something like vindication. Stratwell answered, then let it pass. The answers lacked a single. I wasn't interested in replacing that absence Dorian. Mattered more than any I was typo. Interested in ensuring inside the company couldn't pretend my removal had no cost. Leora told me teams were documenting everything now, not to improve, but to protect themselves. Fear had replaced trust. Dorian noticed the shift and tried to regain momentum with urgency, deadlines, mandates, a new org chart that changed titles without changing understanding. It looked decisive. It wasn't. Ravenport's procurement director followed up with a condition that tightened the screws. Named continuity for 12 months, with penalties for changes. Stratwell accepted. The acceptance forced Dorian into a corner. He needed stability he couldn't manufacture overnight. HR reached out, floating a return in a leadership advisory capacity. I declined politely. Yarrow approved my response. You've already set the boundary, he said. Don't blur it. That boundary protected more than my time. It protected the lesson. If I returned now, the story would be rewritten as a misunderstanding resolved. I wasn't interested in that fiction. I wanted accuracy. Accuracy meant acknowledging that public humiliation had consequences. That day, a former colleague told me Dorian had asked who else held institutional memory. The answer was uncomfortable. Memory isn't a file. It's a relationship built over time. You can't fire that and expect it to reappear on demand. By Friday, the firm had stabilized, but at a cost. Extra hires, extra audits, extra oversight. All of it necessary, all of it expensive. The narrative shifted again, this time quietly. From we cut inefficiency to we underestimated risk. That shift didn't come with announcements. It came with budget reallocations and calendar holds. I took a long walk that evening and realized something important. The revenge people imagine, watching someone fall publicly, had never been the point. The point was truth. Truth about how work actually gets done. Truth about respect. Truth about what happens when leadership confuses theater for stewardship. Dorian learned that lesson the slow way, under fluorescent lights and calendar invites. I learned a different one. Dignity doesn't require applause. It requires boundaries. And once those boundaries are drawn, the system does the rest. The weeks after Ravenport's conditions landed were quieter on the surface and heavier underneath. Stratwell didn't implode. It adjusted, slowly, expensively, and with a level of caution that hadn't existed before. New hires arrived with impressive resumes, but needed months to learn what I'd absorbed over years. Oversight committees multiplied, each designed to ensure no single person could ever again be dismissed without consequence. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Dorian's authority didn't vanish, it thinned. Decisions required consensus. Timelines stretched. The sharp, decisive image he'd cultivated softened into something more tentative. People stopped bringing him half-formed ideas and started bringing him documentation. That change wasn't dramatic, but it was permanent. Inside the firm, trust began to rebuild. Not because leadership demanded it, but because systems enforced it. Outside the firm, I rebuilt my own rhythm. I consulted selectively, chose projects with clear accountability, and slept without the old knot in my chest. The humiliation that once replayed in my mind lost its edge. It became context, not identity. One afternoon, after Ravenport's message arrived from Stratwell's quieter on the surface, requesting a brief heavier call. Underneath. No agenda. Stratwell didn't just a request. It adjusted. On the call, slowly, the COO acknowledged carefully, and with a level of caution that hadn't existed before. Not an apology. New hires arrived rarely with impressive resumes, but a recognition. But needed months to learn. We're changing how decisions like that are made, Oversight committees multiplied. I thanked him and kept my reply each designed to ensure no single person wasn't reconciliation could ever again be dismissed without consequence. The call ended, and with the irony wasn't lost thread tying my emotions. Dorian's authority didn't vanish. That evening, I met Lenora for decisions dinner required and realized consensus. I hadn't checked my phone. Timeline stretched. Freedom doesn't announce itself. Decisive image. It shows up as absence, softened into something more tentative. Of rehearsed arguments. People stopped bringing him half-formed ideas. The system had started bringing him documentation. I had learned that change wasn't dramatic, but it was permanent. Inside the firm, trust began to rebuild. Not because leadership demanded it, but because systems enforced it. Outside the firm, I rebuilt my own rhythm. I consulted selectively, chose projects with clear accountability, and slept without the old knot in my chest. The humiliation that once replayed in my mind lost its edge. It became context, not identity. Months later, I ran into Leora at a cafe. She looked steadier, lighter. "Things are different now," she said. "Not perfect, just clearer." I nodded. Clarity is expensive, but it pays dividends. She told me Dorian had stopped making examples of people. He asked questions now, sometimes too many. I smiled, not because he'd changed, but because the structure demanded it. When leaders are forced to understand consequences, behavior follows. We talked about work, about life, and then about nothing at all. When we parted, there was no bitterness left to exchange. The story had finished telling itself. Looking back, later, the day I was terminated in front of my team felt like an ending designed to erase me. "Things are different now," it wasn't, she said. "It was the beginning of a correction. Just clearer." Dorian believed power was something you demonstrated. Clarity is expensive, but it pays dividends. The detail that mattered. She told me Dorian had stopped making examples of people. It exposes you. He asked questions Friday's client presentation sometimes arrived like a mirror. I smiled, reflecting the gap not because he'd changed, but because the structure demanded it. I didn't sabotage anyone. When leaders are forced to understand consequences, I drew boundaries, protected myself. We talked about work, and let the system reconcile, and then about nothing at all. That's the quiet kind of revenge. There was no bitterness left until it's complete. The story had finished institutions stronger, lessons learned, and dignity intact. The new director fired me to make a point. Friday made a different one. And that point will last longer than any speech he ever gave.